through chapter 9 some, and we're actually going to backtrack a little bit on what we had already covered and then cover some more of the chapter. What we're talking about here, this is the speech that Jesus gives to his 12 apostles before he sends them out. Now, one of the things we talked about this last week, one of the important things to remember about this is that there are things within this that only apply to the 12 apostles. And so you have to be careful about taking some of these principles and applying them to every disciple of Jesus. But one of the things you notice that as you move through the speech, it becomes broader and broader because it talks about things that are going to happen in the future. So as you move through this speech, it becomes more and more specific to us. Does that make sense? The first part you have to kind of pick out, you have to take their original context, their original culture, and you have to kind of figure out the principle behind what is being commanded them to do, and we can apply the principles to ourselves. We can extrapolate out the principles, but we don't take the specific commands. Like we talked about last week, the specific command not to take any money with them. There will be people today who God calls to live on the generosity of others. There are people, I do a lot of reading about Christian community and stuff, there are people who God has called to live 100% upon the generosity of others. He tells them not to worry about money, not to ask for money, not to do anything. He's going to, and it's weird that it really happens. It's not weird, but it really happens. They actually, money shows up and they go through life. There's other people, the other end of the spectrum. There's going to be people that God tells to go out, work, or especially if they're on the more the financial side, invest and actually accumulate wealth with the intention of when God tells them to give it to who he tells them to give it to. So like one of these people that he's called to live on the generosity of others comes along, this guy that God is told to hold on to and accumulate wealth, he tells him to release some of that wealth to this guy.
Amen. Good.
And then most of us are going to fall more in the middle of that. But just to realize that in that passage, the fact that he's telling these people to go out with money, and when you get there, there's going to be these people that I've prepared to take you in, we can extrapolate out of that there's not necessarily a one financial way to be a Christian, right? What you have to do is, are you treating your money as if it is God's money? That's really the one principle you can get, and then understand that there's going to be people that one, he tells not to worry about money and to live off the generosity of others, and generally they're in the ministry when they do that. He's probably not going to tell your average working Joe to do that. He's going to tell your average working Joe what he tells him later in the New Testament: get a job, make a living, right? On the other end, he's going to have people who are actually wealthy, and it's not a sin to be wealthy. It's only when they treat their wealth as if it is their own rather than belonging to God, right? Okay, so that was what we kind of learned last week. Now, I'm going to cover back some of these, one of these passages that we looked at last week. So beginning, we're in Matthew 9, and we're starting with verse 16. And he says, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. And we talked about that last week. 2 weeks ago, we talked about how there were bad shepherds. He looked out, the people were like sheep without a shepherd. He's sending out the apostles as shepherds, but even as shepherds, there's still sheep under the one good shepherd. And so, because the sheep are lost, they're in danger of wolves. We talked about that there's plenty of false prophets out there. One of the things growing up in the conservative side is we're well aware of the false liberal prophets, and what we have a hard time admitting though sometimes is there's plenty of false conservative prophets.
Oh yeah.
And to be very careful about watching, and it goes back to money, be very careful about watching how the person is making their money. Because I know this is a fact, I could make a lot of money telling conservative Christians exactly what they wanted to hear. Right? There's a lot of money to be made doing that. Okay. So there's a lot of wolves, which are false prophets. He said, I'm sending you out as sheep among the wolves. And then he gives them instruction. This is what we kind of skipped over last week that I want to cover. He says, therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. And it's as wise as serpents. So we've seen snakes, and we know what we're talking about. We live out in the wilderness enough. We know how a snake acts. That it's careful,
Very.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's slow moving. That it doesn't say it can't move fast, but generally it's very careful. It's very slow moving, and generally its actions are thought out.
Black Mamba's a little faster.
Yeah, black mamba can be fast, and black snakes can be pretty fast. But generally, like even a black snake, if you're looking at a black snake is trying to get in a chicken house to eat eggs, it does it very carefully,
Right.
very thoughtfully, very slowly.
Inconspicuous.
Right. And so he tells us, what he's telling us is, look, don't just go out here and roughshod this. Right? He said, this is a very dangerous situation I'm sending you into. And the thing is, so when you go into a dangerous situation, you can go into a dangerous situation with the thought of, I'm simply going to overpower the situation. Right? Now, does that exist? Yes, that does exist. In war and certain things, yes, that does exist. But then there's another way to go about things, even within war, where you're going into a dangerous situation. Rather than overpower the situation, you're going to outthink the situation. Right? You go into the situation, rather than coming with overwhelming firepower, you go in with overwhelming thought. Where you figured out how to get in there, get it done, and get out. Right? And so what he's saying here, as believers, we should be putting a lot more thought into this than we normally are. And that's probably one of the great fallings of conservative in Christianity in America, is we've basically tried to roughshod over everybody. Does that make sense? We've just really tried to roughshod over everybody instead of stop. And so I was talking to somebody on discipleship.org, their Facebook page the other day. I put up a post from Bill Hull, and Bill Hull was making the argument that we as the church need to take some blame for what's going on in the world.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That our failure to make disciples of Jesus Christ, we need to take our part of the blame. Now, that's not to say that, yeah, this group didn't do that, and this group didn't do that, yeah, and these groups did that. Yeah, they did. But it's not, part of it is we need to admit as the church, we did not make disciples of Jesus the way they're supposed to be made disciples of Jesus, because at some point, most of these people who are out doing these crazy, stupid things, a lot of them, they may have grew up in church, or at least their parents grew up in church, or at least their grandparents grew up in church.
Right.
And somewhere there was a breakdown where somebody didn't make disciples of Jesus. You're going to be hard-pressed to find somebody out here who doesn't have somewhere in their background somebody going to church. Right? And you have to say then, if somebody somewhere would have made a disciple of Jesus and continued to make disciples of Jesus their way up, these people wouldn't be acting like this. Or at least not so many of them. So we have to take some kind of blame. What he specifically said, he said, these are our disciples. These people out here doing these things, these are our disciples. And what he's saying is, collectively, as the American church, this is what we produced. And they're like, they're not our disciples. And I was like, wait a minute. And I just gave, basically the argument I gave y'all is, okay, if America was predominantly Christian at one point in time, how did it become predominantly not Christian? The only answer is because we didn't make disciples of Jesus the way we're supposed to make disciples of Jesus. That's the only answer. Right? And they kind of like, yeah, you got a point there. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. The thought we have to take into it, we have to step back and think, how did we get here?
Right.
What part did we have to share in this blame? What part of the blame do we have to share in this? And then, how do we now get out of this?
That's the key.
Right. And how do we now get out of this? Because we tried roughshodding over it, and it is what it is now. So I don't think roughshodding over it's going to work, because obviously it's proven that it's not working. So now it's more of a covert operation. To be honest, that's more where we're at right now. We're more at how do we go out and have, rather than roughshod over these people, have these shrewd as serpents, wise as a serpent, gentle as a dove type of conversations.
Christ-like conversations again.
Right.
Very helpful.
Right. Where Christ had these conversations with people, where he didn't just roughshod over with them, and he helped them understand and see the truth of the matter.
That's right.
Right? In such a way that they are willing to hear it.
Yes.
Right? That's very hard too, because I can go here and I can tell people truth all day long. That's my problem. Me being able to tell people truth in such a way that they actually want to hear it and they actually want to accept it, that's what I struggle with. That's where the gentle as a dove part that I struggle with. All right, so going on. And he goes on, he says, be on your guard. You'll be handed over to the local councils and flogged in the synagogues. In other words, the first persecution you're going to face is not going to be from the world. It's going to be from religious people.
That's right.
Right. On my account, you'll be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles. And we talked about how you go back. He says, first, don't go to the Gentiles. He said, I've got a plan to get you in front of the Gentiles. I want you to go to the Jews. The Jews are going to arrest you and beat you. And then after the Jews have arrested and beat you, then the governors are going to want to see you while you're still in chains and in jail. And you look in Acts, that's generally how it plays out. And we're like, oh yeah, wait, what, God? Tell me that plan again. Go to the religious people, but the religious people aren't going to listen to me. The religious people are going to beat me, and then they're going to turn me over to the Gentiles, and then the Gentiles will hear me. He's like, God, can't we just skip over and go to the Gentiles? No, that's not the way this works. Right? And so the point being is God had a plan all along to get them in front of the Gentiles. But when they arrest you, do not worry about what you say or how you say it. At that time you will be given what to say, for you will not be speaking, but the Spirit of the Father speaking through you. And we say, well, look, I don't have to study the Bible. Okay, if you just took that verse and made it mean what you want to make it mean, yes. But you got to realize these guys have been several years being discipled by Jesus, and even after they go do this, they're going to come back and be discipled by Jesus again. So these guys have been preparing, and that's what he's saying is, trust in the preparation you have done so far. If you've discipled, that's another thing. So if you've discipled somebody, and I've noticed this as I've been going through the discipleship process, I'm much more prepared to speak to people off the cuff than I have in the past.
Thank you, Lord.
Right. Going right on. Brother, now here's where we're getting to new stuff here. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. You will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. Truly I tell you, you will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. So, now, the death part, we're probably not going to be put to death. Right? It may come to that point sometime in our lifetime. It doesn't look, see, a lot of times for the last 50 years, we as evangelicals have been sitting around talking about when the liberals were going to take power and kill us. It doesn't look like they're going to kill us. They just want to silence us.
Right. At first.
Right. Now, and that's kind of my point. We were kind of wanting to jump to the cut my head off part.
Right. But that was a stretch.
Right, and the reality is, might it get there someday? It might, but it doesn't look like in our lifetimes necessarily it's going to get there. What we're really dealing with is they're going to silence you. They're going to attempt to silence you. And right now we do have certain protections in place as far as there have been some good decisions made from the Supreme Court as far as protecting people religiously from losing their jobs. So we do have some protection here in place that it's even hard to lose your job. It's pretty hard to lose your job even if you lose your job, you can probably take it to court and win. But there may get to a point where it's not necessarily they're going to kill you, but you may lose your job.
Right. But they didn't have that back in their day.
Right. See, all that, none of that existed back then. So here's where we've got to extrapolate the principle. Right? Okay, they're probably not going to kill you. Right now, you're probably not even going to lose your job. Right? What is it going to look like for a brother to betray brother, or a father to child, child to father? What is that going to look like, really? It's just going to be ostracization.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Really what we're facing, what we face, is ostracization.
Not going to talk to you anymore.
Right.
That's right.
Right. Now, be careful that it's not because you did something stupid.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Because we can't fall into that trap of, well, I'm standing up for Jesus and such and such and such don't want to talk to me. Don't want to talk to me anymore. This is personally. I'm not throwing rocks at anybody. Do they not want to talk to me because I'm standing up for Jesus, or do they not want to talk to me because I'm annoying?
Yeah, obnoxious.
Right. Which is I have a tendency to be overbearing, and because I'm physically large and physically loud, and then you add overbearing to that, I wouldn't want to talk to me either. You know what I mean? And so part of that is before you say, well, such and such is betraying me because of Christ, ask yourself, really be honest with yourself and ask yourself the questions is there something, because I'm working through this all the time, believe me. I sit and I say, okay, here's the message, and they rejected the message. Did they reject the message, or did they reject how I presented the message?
Sure.
So I'm working on that one. But so make sure that, like I said, if somebody ostracizes you, it's not just because you're an annoying jerk. Make sure that it is actually because of Jesus. All right, you will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. So one of the signs is that you continue on it. I have seen people. So one of the things that's happening now, because of the social revolution that we're having right now, which a large part is fueled by, I'm not saying they're evil because I have one and I use it, I write on it, I read on it. Smartphones is actually largely fueling the revolution we have right now, because people have access to information and access to things that they didn't have before. And they can organize through a smartphone in ways they couldn't organize before. Right? There's a lot of what's going on in the world is going on in the world because first the internet, but then connect that internet to a smartphone, to your portable computer basically. There's a lot going on in the world because of that. Now, because of that, one of the things I've seen is there's a kind of a falling away that's happening right now. There's a falling away that's happening right now where people who were conservative Christians or conservative evangelicals, theologically conservative, are falling away, sometimes completely apostatizing. And I actually appreciate that better. Sometimes they're just moving from conservative evangelical Christianity to progressive Christianity. And part of the reason being because of social media, because of cell phones, because of the internet, they can connect to other people that are like them, and they can plug into this community that exists online that previously didn't exist. So go back in time, you were an evangelical Christian, you belonged to an evangelical church, but because that's all you knew, even if you started struggling with that, and I'm talking about struggling as far as thinking something's wrong with the church, it's not doing it, like you start struggling to believe in it, period, right? Or you think that it should be much more progressive than it is, which means you allow things that the Bible does not allow.
Right.
They wouldn't voice those concerns. They would go through life basically silently. Well, now they can connect to people on the internet who are voicing those same concerns. And so they can form this community on the internet, and I'm seeing this happen. And because they form this community on the internet, right, well then that gives them a reason now to fall away the church. So they're not standing firm to the end, right? Because part of it is they're coming under this social pressure to give in to these things, right? They see, and so now, and there's probably going to be a pretty good wave of it, because you know how that once there's a crack in the dam winds up breaking. Well, there's been cracks in the dam. You had like Joshua Harris, that right? Yeah, Josh Harris. Then you have these other guys, these other prominent people who have apostatized or turned to progressive Christianity, and now somebody's going to see that and they're going to go, oh, well look, his life didn't end. I'm going to turn to it too. And so I see that there's like a wave of people who are not standing firm to the end because they can't stand up against the culture. The culture has weighed so heavily upon them that rather than be ostracized by the culture, right, they'll choose to be ostracized by the church. You see what I mean? Because they found this new community out there who will accept them in. They're not standing firm with the church, because the church is going to be ostracized by the culture at large. The true church is going to be ostracized by the culture at large. Rather than be ostracized by the culture at large, they're walking away from the church and accepting the culture at large and adapting their Christianity so that the culture at large will accept their Christianity. They're not standing firm to the end.
In part because some of them were never truly saved. They went out from us because they were not of us.
Right. Yeah. And I would say most.
Yes.
I would go along with most of them. Yeah. All right. When you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. Now this is interesting here, right? He didn't say stand firm and fight your way out and kill everybody. What did he say?
Or let yourself be killed.
Right. He said there are times when you're going to be persecuted. Go somewhere else.
That's right.
We've talked about the bus analogy. Shut the door on the bus, drive on down the road.
Joseph and Mary and Jesus, they were directed to go to Egypt.
Right, so there are times. Now, one of the things in is America, what we have, we falsely, again, so what we believed was America's going to stand strong in Christianity, and then there's going to be this really quick switch to liberalism where they cut our heads off.
Nah, that'd take 30, 40 years.
Or more. So we're already about 50, at least 50 years into it or more. More like 60 years into it. Okay? So where we're struggling at is rather than this quick shift to where conservative Christianity had sway in the culture to conservative Christians are having their heads cut off, we're having to deal in this extended period of time where conservative, evangelical, theologically conservative evangelicals are being ostracized by the culture at large, and we don't have very much pull and sway in the culture at large like we used to. And that, we never thought that would happen. Does that make sense? We thought it was going to go straight to getting our heads cut off. And so we're struggling with how do we work within this new culture where they're not coming to cut our heads off, but at the same time, they are ostracizing us. And we don't have the pull and the power like we used to. And so that's kind of a struggle. We never thought we would deal with social persecution. We thought we would deal with straight up physical persecution, and so we're struggling with what does it look like simply to be socially persecuted. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Truly I tell you, you will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Now this is kind of a weird one here because Israel's fairly small. It's not really big. It seems like they would be able to go through all of Israel before the second coming of Christ. I mean, it's been 2,000 years now since Jesus left. Have they gotten through all of Israel? No, they didn't. Because we talked about this before, what happened in 70 AD, a group of the Zealots, who Simon the Zealot was, the Zealots rose up because Rome was talking about putting a statue in the temple. Right? The Zealots said, we are not going to have none of that. Rome came in, killed everybody, killed all the Zealots, and said, okay, you don't let us put a statue in your temple. How about we just completely pull your temple down so there's not a stone left standing on top of a stone. And we kick all of you out of Jerusalem. We rebuild Jerusalem as a Roman city, and we disperse a lot of you just straight up out of Israel. And so before they could get through all the towns in Israel, which shouldn't have been that hard of a thing to do, right, the Jews are kicked out.
That's right.
Of Israel. So that's kind of a weird prophecy because it sounds like Jesus is going to be coming back really quickly.
But he knew that...
Right. He knew what was going to happen. He knew that they weren't going to be able to get through all the towns in Israel because Rome was going to overthrow them in 70 AD. And ultimately you get to the point where there just are no really Jews in Israel. I mean, there's very, very few Jews left in Israel. And so now we're back again doing what? Trying to evangelize Israel. You see what I'm saying? 2,000 years later, this prophecy is holding up.
And making some progress, but
right.
slow.
Yeah. We're still trying to go through the cities and towns in Israel.
Yes.
In other words, so this prophecy, you read that, and be like, well, look, didn't they get through all of Israel?
No,
they didn't. And we're still trying to get through all of Israel. Right? And he says, here, we won't get through all of it before he comes back.
It wasn't just the Romans. The religious establishment is the one that gave, like at Nazareth, they wouldn't even let Jesus continue.
Right, because part of it was because of, again, the Jews themselves wouldn't let them go through all of Israel. Which is one reason why God let Rome take them over. All right, so going on to the next one. This is where we get into more. This one applies much more to us. The student is not above the teacher, nor is a servant above his master. So this is talking about a disciple and his master. It is enough for students to be like their teachers and servants like their masters. So take that one and put that one into discipleship. What does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus?
Boy.
To be like Jesus. Right there's about as simple as you can get a discipleship statement. It is enough. In other words, it's enough. That's all you need to worry about. Well, what do I need to do in life? You need to be like Jesus.
And be part of that process of
Right,
transformation.
be in that process of being conformed to the image
Doesn't
of
just
Jesus.
happen.
And then as you continue to grow, once you get to a level of maturity that you're able to,
You get
help other people be like Jesus. Well, what about my job? Okay, what about your job? Be like Jesus at your job.
amen.
Well, what about my family? What about your family? Be like Jesus in your family.
Right.
Well, what about my church? Well, what about your church? Be like Jesus in your church. Okay, do you see how that clarifies a lot of things? Well, I don't like my job. Okay. You saying that maybe you're being persecuted at your job? That you're having to suffer for Christ at your job? Because you know what? It says in the Bible, it says you're going to have to suffer for Christ. You see what I'm saying? Why do we, this is another American thing that we've got into, I expect to have the perfect job where I'm perfectly happy and I get to share Jesus all day long in my job and nobody ever says anything to me.
Fallacy.
Yes. Yes. Right? Yeah. I mean, that's just not the world we live in right now. You might have to have a job you don't like because it's the only way you feed your family.
It's the only kind of job I've ever had.
That's the only. That's good. That's a good. But you see what I'm saying? You might have to go to a job you don't necessarily like. But now, let's ask this. Why would God put you in a job you don't necessarily like?
To help other people.
Help other people.
And to help transform you as well.
Right. To transform you into the image of Jesus. Right? Because what did Jesus do in this world?
Carpenter.
Well, he was a carpenter, but I'm talking about what was his experience in this world when he was a human being?
Nothing positive.
Right, suffering and rejection. The only thing positive that went on was what? He made disciples. Do you see what I mean? Suffering and rejection. When you look at his life, what did he do positive besides the dying for our sins part? We're talking about up to that part. We're talking about what he do up until the point he died on the cross. Right, he made disciples of Jesus. Well, maybe God puts you in that specific job so people who are considering being a disciple of Jesus can watch you as a disciple of Jesus do a job you don't necessarily like and do it well and do it Christ-like. You see what I mean? So this is where it gets. This is where we've got to kind of shrewd as serpents. Think about what's going on, right? If the head of the house has been called Beelzebub, how much more will the members of his house be called Beelzebub? In other words, if they call Jesus a devil, if the religious people call Jesus a devil,
Right.
why are you surprised when they call you a devil?
Right.
Right? Going on. So do not be afraid of them, for there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. So this is actually, I like this verse because sometimes, in my opinion, sometimes people get a little hung up on the mystery of Christianity. Well, it's a mystery. Well, it's a mystery. Well, it's a mystery. Go ahead.
Used to be.
Okay, there's not as much of a mystery as you say there's a mystery.
Right.
And a good one is sanctification. This is a big one that I got to be careful how I talk to people because I get mad and overbearing and don't talk to them correctly. Well, it's a mystery how God conforms us to the image of Jesus. No, it's not.
It's a journey.
Right. I can tell you exactly how it happens. He gives you the power of the Holy Spirit. He gives you the words and ways of Jesus to be able to do them. And he says, here, study the words and ways of Jesus. And then through the power of the Holy Spirit, do the words and ways of Jesus. In a community of other people doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
There, that took what, 10 seconds? It's not a mystery how he conforms you to the image of Jesus. Nowhere in the Bible does it say it's a mystery.
It's a struggle.
Now, it might be a struggle, but it tells you that openly.
Right.
Right? There's a lot of things that we have because of our failure to be as shrewd as serpents,
Right.
and to study and to learn and to know and to think. There's a lot of things that we just went, well, it's a mystery.
It's a cop-out.
And it's a cop-out, is what they're doing. Right? What does he say here? He says, now, ultimately, some of this stuff won't be exposed until the end. But again, Jesus says, if anybody doesn't have knowledge, let him ask. Right? There's a lot of things that I think we can have the knowledge of, that we've argued that you can't know, that I think we can know, but we just haven't known them because we haven't committed to being disciples of Jesus. Right? Stan can tell you this, because a lot of things didn't make sense before. Once you understand what it meant to be a disciple of Jesus, you're like, man, this makes so much more sense. I mean, Stan's been in church. How long have you been in church now? 50 years? 60 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
You've been in your whole life?
Whole life.
So you've been in it almost 70 years now. 62, 3, how old?
64.
64 years. 64 years. Stuff didn't make sense for 64 years. There was stuff for me that didn't make sense for 40-some years. But then, when the right verses were shown to me in the right light, and it's not twisting the Bible,
No,
it's
not.
it's really what it says.
Right.
You're like, well, so much stuff that they said is a mystery. It's not really a mystery. Right? So anyway, going on. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight, and what is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the rooftop. So that's discipleship. What I teach you in private, go out and teach publicly. That's discipleship, right? Do not be afraid of those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both body and soul in hell. So let's take that for a second. We're all going to stand before Jesus one day. Why were you not committed to being a disciple of Jesus? Well, I got a lot of grief about that, Jesus. Well, again, we're probably not going to be killed in body here. Unless something changes really, really quick, really, really soon. Which you could, but I think it's just going to be a slow burn, more of a slow burn. We're not going to be physically killed. We're going to be socially ostracized. And, well, why didn't you commit more to being a disciple? Well, it was socially uncomfortable, Jesus. Right.
Did you get whipped?
He said, did it feel anything like a cross? I'm just wondering. Right? Did it feel anything like a scourging? I'm just wondering. I'm asking for somebody else. Right? Again, really, we've all got to stand in front of Jesus one day. And I think about, and this really does cross my mind a lot, because this doesn't play out the way, the discipleship thing, all that plays out the way. I'm getting a lot more resistance than I thought I would get. Right? Now again, I understand sometimes I get resistance because I'm being overbearing, but I'm trying to correct that, and I'm trying to go back and find when I've been overbearing, and I'm trying to make sure I'm not presenting the message in an overbearing way, and I still get resistance. I'm getting a lot more resistance than I thought I'd get. Right? And I look and I go, God, you know what? I'm getting a lot more resistance than I thought I'd get, God. And he goes, and?
Yeah.
Really? You want to match your resistance with mine?
Right. He said, did it feel anything like a cross? Did they scourge you beforehand? I'm asking for somebody else. Right? I'm getting a lot more resistance than I thought it'd be. Okay, you're getting a lot more resistance. You thought it'd be, and?
Yeah.
Right? I'm not going to stand in front of Jesus on Judgment Day and go, Jesus, I really committed myself to that discipleship thing, and I really tried hard to go out and make disciples of Jesus. And man, I just got too much resistance, so I got tired and quit. I don't think he's going to cast me into hell because I really think I'm saved, but I might be sweeping streets in heaven for a while. You see what I mean? That's what Jesus says. That's what Jesus. You're afraid of what they're going to do to you in this life. Why are you more afraid of what they're going to do to you in this life than you are afraid of me on Judgment Day?
That's a good question.
And that's what we really have to ask ourselves. Why am I more afraid, why am I more afraid of a fallen people, a fallen society? Why am I more afraid of them? Now, well, part of it is it's not just out of fear of Jesus that I do these things. It's because I really truly believe Jesus is who he is. And I really truly believe that this is the best benefit to me. This is the best benefit to my wife and my children. It's the best benefit to the people around me. This is to the best benefit of the world. I really truly believe in this. It's not just out of fear of Jesus, but at the same time, what it shows you is if somebody walks away from Jesus out of fear of the world or turns to progressive Christianity out of a fear of the world, then I have to ask the question, do you really believe in Jesus? Because you're not even afraid of Jesus. You see what I mean? And if you understood who Jesus would be, not only would you believe that his way is the right way and the good way, But you would also be afraid of Jesus because you'd understand who Jesus is and what power he has and what he's going to do on Judgment Day. So going on. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside of your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. So I can look at sports. My favorite sport was wrestling, so I tend to frame things in wrestling. And I think it's probably the oldest sport too, right? And I wish my son would wrestle, but his issues, he don't wrestle, right? But it is what it is. So let's say you're a parent and your son is out there wrestling, right? Your son's out there wrestling, or playing a sport, playing football, whatever. But they're out there and they're losing. They're losing, right? Sometimes they win, but sometimes they lose. Does the fact that you do not get up and go out there and help them physically win that match say you don't love them? If you truly want your son to not only develop as a wrestler, but also a lot of sports do help people develop as people. If you want them to develop as both a wrestler or you want them to develop as a person, you coach them and give them instructions. And then what do?
Allow them to learn.
You send them out on the wrestling mat.
Yeah.
And so what happens sometimes?
You lose.
Sometimes, and if you've ever wrestled, Todd didn't wrestle in school, but he did wrestle me when we were, sometimes it hurts, don't it?
Oh, yeah.
But now when you were wrestling me, you never thought I was really going to hurt you, did you? Because we were friends. Right? Because we were friends. And there was times, me and Todd had some knockdown dragouts in our backyard a couple of times. But it was interesting that me and Todd were willing to have a knockdown dragout with each other. Why? Because we knew in the end, neither one of us was going to cross the line where we were actually going to permanently hurt the other person. Right? We trusted each other enough to we were just testing our strength. You know what I mean? We were just young men testing our strength against one another. Okay? If you as a parent watching your son wrestle, the best thing you can do for them is to let them wrestle, even if they lose. The worst thing I ever saw in wrestling was a kid just straight up lost and then his parent threw a fit. Right? Threw a fit at the ref, threw a fit at the coach, threw a fit at their kid. Worst thing, threw a fit at their kid.
It's their skill.
Right? Again, the kid just straight up lost. Allow the kid to straight up lose and use that and learn from that and develop. That's the best thing. Use that, allow that, develop them into the next time they go out on the mat. Learn from that. There were things that over time I learned not to do. Because when I did those things, I lost. You see what I mean? So again, it doesn't show a lack of concern for the child that you allow them to go out and struggle and even sometimes lose. Okay, again, what is Christ, Jesus, God's ultimate purpose for us is reconform us to the image of Jesus, to develop us into the image of Jesus so that we're developed back into the image of God that we were originally created to be, so that we might render unto Him the glory He is due.
And that's going to involve some crashing and burning.
Right. If He stepped in every single time, would you develop?
No.
Right? Think of it. He's coached you. He's provided coaching for you. He's provided teammates for you. But at some point, you're out there on the wrestling mat. And He's just going to let it unfold the way it unfolds. And even if you lose, learn from the loss. Develop from the loss. It doesn't show that He doesn't value you, that He allows you to struggle, and that He allows you to lose. In fact, it shows that He does value you by allowing you to lose. Just like that coach or the parent, if they allow the child to lose and go to the child after they lost, and rather than throwing a fit, go, okay, you lost. Why'd you lose? Why'd you lose? Right? That shows that parent has more value in their kid than the parent who throws a fit over their kid. Because they really, truly want to benefit their kid.
Yeah.
Right? So you see how God allowing us to suffer, allowing us sometimes to lose, and in fact, in what the way we see it as losing, really it's not a loss, it's just a development. That he truly values us in allowing those things to happen so that we might be conformed to the image of Jesus.
The Lord himself got into a wrestling match with Jacob in
Right.
a difficult time of his life. They struggled all night. He injures him permanently, and then he says, as a prince of God, you've struggled and you've prevailed. Now your name is Israel. So,
Right.
I mean, there's a lot there.
Right. There's on that show, The Chosen, they flash back to Jacob, and they ask him about his God, and he says, "Where's your God at?" Well, he's like, "Well, he's invisible." He said, "Okay." He said, "But this one time I did see." He said, this one time I did see, and he wrestled me and he dislocated my hip."
Yeah.
And the guy says, "So you believe and trust in an invisible God who the one time you did see him hurt you?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Yeah." You see, because Jacob understands what God's purposes are.
That's
Right? So, do I trust in a God who allows me to go through things that I don't think I should go through? That go through wrestling matches that I don't think I should go through? Yeah, I do. And he doesn't stop the wrestling match. He allows it to go through the end. He allows me to lose, and he comes down and he says, "Okay, you lost. Let's talk about why you lost." Right? And he, go ahead. No, you're fine.
Without being able to say I wrestled God.
Right.
I
Now-
lost.
Yeah. Well, see, and that's part of it too. Is there's going to be mentally wrestling matches with God.
Yeah.
God, I don't understand this. I don't get this. I don't understand this. In that point, this is what I was saying. This is taking more effort than I thought it was. I'm getting more resistance than I thought I would get. Do I really truly believe in the ways and the words of Jesus? Yes, I do. So therefore, I'm going to continuously commit myself to the words and ways of Jesus, even if it doesn't work out the way I thought it would work out. Because if I walk away from the words and ways of Jesus when it doesn't work out the way I thought it would work out, did I really truly believe in the words and ways of Jesus? No, I didn't. Right? Because right here I can read the words and ways of Jesus where he says, sometimes it ain't going to work out the way you thought. God still values you. In fact, he's allowing that thing because he values you.
And he's got a plan.
Right.
Like you said, to get before the Gentiles, the Philippian jailer. Could you
Right.
imagine getting beaten? It's
Right.
midnight, you're singing praises, you have all the prisoners' attention, you have
Right.
the jailer's attention, and you have God's attention. He sends an earthquake, and look at the great conversion that
Right.
resulted because Paul and Silas submitted.
Right. To the suffering.
That's right.
They submitted. They took this, what Jesus said, literally. They're like, because they get in trouble with the Jews first.
That's right.
They get in trouble with the Jews.
That's why they get locked up.
Then they get in trouble with the Gentiles,
Mhm.
and then they get beaten and locked up. And then there's a revival. But not until after it looks like, for all intents and purposes, they've lost.
That's right.
Right? All right, let's close the prayer, y'all. Our gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for giving us the words of Jesus that long before it ever happened, he told us what was going to happen. And we just ask you that we would remember these things as we go through life, Father, when we're in those wrestling matches, when we're in those struggles, where it feels like and it looks like we're losing, maybe to ourselves or to the rest of the world,
That's right.
that we realize that you have not stopped valuing us because you haven't stepped in and changed the situation, that you value us enough to allow us to go through the situation, and you allow us to develop as images of God through that situation. We just ask you that you give us the clarity of mind when those things are happening, Father, and that you would bring us alongside one another where we can remind each other of that. We can encourage each other through that. We ask all these things in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.